A secret hides in the quiet of dawn, a secret that shatters the boundaries of innocence and sparks a desperate quest for justice. Before we dive into this harrowing journey, subscribe now for more powerful stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Tammy awoke in the pale light of early morning with an unsettling sensation that was hard to ignore, a dull, throbbing ache in her lower abdomen. At first, she convinced herself it was nothing more than a minor stomach discomfort, perhaps caused by something she had eaten or the natural cramps that occasionally troubled her. However, as she slowly sat up in her modest, dimly lit bedroom, she realized that this pain felt different, heavier, as though a mysterious force was pressing inside her. With each movement, the ache intensified, rippling through her body like a slow, relentless tide. Despite the persistent discomfort, Tammy tried to maintain her usual morning routine. She rubbed her belly in a futile attempt to ease the sharp sensations and glanced out at the soft hues of dawn filtering through thin curtains. The clock on the wall read 5:30 a.m., and though the hour was unreasonably early, she couldn't muster the strength to go back to sleep. As she pulled the blanket aside and stepped onto the cold wooden floor, a twisting pain shot through her side, a warning she desperately tried to silence with steady, deep breaths. Yet, every step felt like an uphill battle against an invisible enemy. Downstairs, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the quiet hum of an awakening city. Her mother, Martha, was already in the kitchen, her face a mask of calm routine. Martha greeted Tammy with a gentle, "Morning, sweetheart," barely looking up from her steaming cup. Tammy offered a weak smile, not wanting to burden her mother with the reality of the escalating pain. Even as Martha's eyes flickered with concern at Tammy's paleness, the girl simply muttered that she was just tired. But inside, Tammy's mind was a swirl of doubt and fear. She sipped a glass of water slowly, hoping it might somehow dull the internal pressure that was growing by the minute. With a heavy heart and an even heavier body, Tammy stepped outside for school. The bus ride was uneventful, yet every bump on the road echoed like a drumbeat in her stomach. At school, the noise and activity around her only served to heighten her discomfort. Teachers droned on, and the chatter of classmates blurred into a distant background murmur as Tammy tried to focus on her studies while an incessant pain nagged at her. By lunchtime, her appetite had completely vanished. Even the sight of food made her stomach churn. Tammy's best friend, Aisha, noticed the pallor on her face and the way she clutched her abdomen. "Are you okay?" Aisha asked softly. Tammy only nodded in return, swallowing the lump of fear in her throat. Unable to concentrate on the meal, she excused herself, seeking refuge in the quiet sanctuary of an empty restroom stall. There, in the dim light, Tammy lifted her shirt in a tentative gesture of self-examination. What she saw, a slight, unexpected swelling, made her heart skip a beat. Was it simply bloating, or was something more sinister at play? The idea was too terrifying to consider, and yet, deep down, she sensed that her body was sending a desperate, silent plea for help. Each moment that passed in that cramped stall deepened Tammy's dread. She pressed her fingers against her lower abdomen, and with every touch, the pain flared up sharply, as if her body were protesting against a hidden truth. Alone with her mounting fears, Tammy began to wonder if the strange heaviness in her stomach was the prelude to something life-altering. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a long, tumultuous journey that would turn her world upside down. The day continued with a lingering unease that Tammy could no longer shake. At school, the initial hope that the morning discomfort might subside faded into an inescapable reality. Something was terribly wrong with her body. As classes passed, she fought to concentrate on lessons, but the intermittent spasms in her stomach drew her attention inward. Every laugh from her friends or casual conversation with her teachers felt juxtaposed against the private agony she endured. Her mind was a battleground, torn between the desire to ignore the pain and the need to confront it. During lunch, the cafeteria, usually a place of laughter and chatter, transformed into an overwhelming pressure cooker. The noise, the bright lights, and the constant movement only amplified her internal distress. Her best friend, Aisha, noticed that Tammy's hand trembled as she reached for her tray. "You okay?" Aisha whispered, her voice thick with concern. Tammy only managed a weak nod, her eyes betraying a storm of unspoken terror. With each passing minute, the pain seemed to throb louder, making her stomach feel as if it were swelling with a secret too heavy to bear. Unable to endure the suffocating atmosphere, Tammy excused herself from the table. She slipped away from the crowd, her footsteps echoing in the silent corridor as she hurried toward the solitude of the restroom. Locking herself inside a stall, she hesitated only for a moment before lifting her shirt once more to inspect the inexplicable change in her body. The swelling was subtle but undeniable, a soft, rounded bump that was not there before. Her fingers traced the new contours with a mix of curiosity and dread. Every touch ignited a wave of sharp pain, as if confirming a terrible reality she wasn't yet ready to face. Inside the quiet stall, Tammy's thoughts whirled like a tempest. Memories of past minor aches clashed with this unfamiliar agony, leaving her to wonder if perhaps she had done something wrong or if her body was rebelling in a way she couldn't understand. The overwhelming pressure was no longer confined to her stomach. It was a pressure on her very soul, a silent reminder that the life she had known was on the brink of irreversible change. She tried to convince herself that it was merely a momentary bout of discomfort, something that would fade with time. Yet, as she sat there alone, the evidence of her body's betrayal could not be ignored. By the time the final bell rang, Tammy was a shadow of her former self. The walk home was a blur of muted colors and distant sounds, every step a painful reminder that the secret brewing inside her was growing ever larger. Once inside her small apartment, the air felt heavier, the silence more oppressive. Martha's usual warm smile was replaced with a concerned frown as she took in Tammy's pallid appearance. "What's been bothering you all day?" Martha asked softly, her eyes searching her daughter's face for clues. Tammy hesitated, unable to form words that could encapsulate the torment she felt. "It's nothing, just a stomach ache," she replied, forcing a weak smile. Yet Martha's maternal instincts told her otherwise. As Tammy moved to her room, every step was a silent testimony to the struggle waging within her body. In the solitude of her dimly lit room, Tammy sat on her bed, clutching a small pillow as if it could somehow absorb the pain. The swelling in her abdomen was not just physical. It felt like an ominous harbinger of change, a secret that was growing louder and more insistent with every passing moment. With the day drawing to a close, Tammy was left alone with her mounting fears, unaware that the hidden truth was about to shatter the fragile normalcy of her world forever. By the time school let out for the day, the persistent pain that had dogged Tammy since morning had evolved into something far more severe and unyielding. The walk home, once a familiar routine, now felt like a marathon of suffering. Every step was a reminder of the twisting, unrelenting pressure deep within her. As she climbed the stairs of her apartment building, the sharp pain in her abdomen morphed into searing spasms that left her gasping for breath. Tammy's world, once filled with the simplicity of school life and fleeting friendships, was rapidly turning into a nightmare of agony and uncertainty. When Tammy finally pushed open the door to her apartment, Martha was waiting. The familiar warmth in her mother's eyes had been replaced by an expression of deep worry. "Tammy, what happened?" Martha asked, her voice trembling with concern as she gently guided her daughter to a nearby chair. Tammy tried to muster a reassuring smile, but her body betrayed her, and tears welled up in her eyes. "My stomach, it's been hurting all day," Tammy managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. Martha's face contorted with alarm as she examined Tammy closely, noticing the unusual roundness of her abdomen, a detail that sent a cold shiver down her spine. At first, Martha suspected food poisoning or perhaps a reaction to something Tammy had eaten, but the intensity and persistence of the pain ruled out any common ailment. Martha's heart pounded as she helped Tammy settle onto the couch, her mind racing with fears of what might be unfolding inside her daughter. The once familiar apartment now felt like a battleground between hope and despair. Tammy's attempts to describe the pain were fragmented and halting, her words laden with uncertainty. "It's like something's pressing inside me, something that won't let go," she murmured, her eyes clouded with a mixture of fear and confusion. Martha's maternal instincts flared as she clutched Tammy's hand tightly, silently pleading for answers that neither of them could give. "We're going to figure this out," she promised softly, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. As the evening crept in and darkness blanketed the small living room, Tammy's condition only worsened. The pain evolved into a series of violent spasms that racked her frail body. Each spasm was more intense than the last, leaving Tammy trembling and gasping for relief. The gentle hum of the refrigerator in the background was the only sound that broke the heavy silence, underscoring the gravity of the situation. Tammy's eyes closed in exhaustion as she tried to fight off the agony, but sleep eluded her. Hours passed with no respite, and the pain morphed into an ever-present companion that shadowed her every thought. In that lonely twilight, Tammy realized with dawning horror that her body was no longer under her control. It was betraying her in ways she had never imagined possible. Martha sat by her side, her own heart breaking with every silent cry from her daughter. In that fragile moment, mother and daughter clung to each other, their shared despair a silent plea for an explanation that remained agonizingly out of reach. Little did they know, the true nature of Tammy's suffering was about to emerge, shattering the remnants of their hope and forever altering the course of their lives. Night fell with a suffocating weight as Tammy's condition spiraled into a level of torment neither she nor Martha had ever known. In the dim light of her bedroom, Tammy lay curled beneath a threadbare blanket, her face drawn and pale, each shallow breath punctuated by fits of uncontrollable pain. The oppressive ache in her abdomen was now accompanied by sudden, violent spasms that left her body racked with tremors. Every time the pain surged, it felt as if her insides were being twisted, pulled, and stretched beyond any natural limit. Tammy's eyes, wide with terror, darted around the dark room, silently begging for the nightmare to end. Martha's heart ached as she watched her daughter suffer. She sat beside Tammy's bed, her own hands trembling as they reached out to comfort the girl who had become so vulnerable. "Hold on, baby," Martha whispered, brushing a stray lock of hair from Tammy's damp forehead. But the words, meant to console, fell flat in the face of such profound agony. Martha's mind raced with worry. Had she missed the signs of something far more sinister lurking beneath Tammy's seemingly ordinary aches? The gentle routine of their lives had been shattered, replaced by a terror that grew with every passing minute. In a desperate bid to ease Tammy's pain, Martha tried everything she could think of: cool compresses, soothing herbal teas, soft lullabies sung in the quiet of the night. But nothing could stem the relentless tide of suffering. The pain persisted, intensifying with a cruel determination that made Tammy's body shudder uncontrollably. In between gasps and incoherent whispers, Tammy managed to utter, "It feels like something is inside me, something I can't fight." Each word was a stab at Martha's heart, confirming her worst fears. This was not an ordinary illness. It was a profound betrayal by a body that was supposed to protect her daughter. As the hours dragged on, the bedroom became a sanctuary of quiet despair. The silence was broken only by Tammy's agonized cries and the soft, urgent murmur of Martha's reassurances. In those moments, every heartbeat felt like an echo of impending doom. Martha's thoughts turned dark as she contemplated the possibility that Tammy might be harboring a secret so terrible that even trying to understand it would shatter her completely. The realization that her daughter's suffering might be linked to something beyond a simple stomach ache clawed at her sanity. Then, in a heart-stopping moment of clarity, Martha noticed it, the subtle, inexplicable roundness of Tammy's stomach that had grown more pronounced with every spasm. Her maternal intuition screamed that this was no mere coincidence. It was a sign, a harbinger of a truth too dreadful to confront. Martha's hands trembled as she gently caressed Tammy's arm, silently promising that she would do everything in her power to protect her daughter from whatever horror lay hidden within. The night deepened, and with it, the certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. In that fragile, heart-wrenching darkness, a mother's fear became the spark that ignited a desperate quest for answers, a quest that would soon lead them down a path of unimaginable revelation and sorrow. The terrifying night stretched on, and with each passing minute, Tammy's condition grew more critical, as the pain morphed into excruciating spasms that left her gasping and weak. Martha's panic transformed into determined urgency. Realizing that her daughter's suffering could no longer be ignored, Martha reached for the phone with trembling fingers. With a voice thick with fear and desperation, she dialed 911. The sound of the ringing phone seemed to echo in the quiet apartment, every second intensifying the gravity of the situation. Within moments, the shrill wail of an ambulance siren broke the silence. Martha's heart pounded as she cradled Tammy's hand, trying to offer solace even as tears streamed silently down her face. The paramedics arrived with swift efficiency, their calm voices belying the gravity of the moment. One of them knelt by Tammy's side, checking her pulse and murmuring that her condition was critical. "She's in distress," he said softly, his brows furrowed in concern as he prepared to administer fluids. Martha's mind raced. What unseen force was ravaging her daughter's fragile body? The ambulance ride was a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices. Tammy's condition deteriorated steadily as the vehicle navigated dim, rain-slicked streets. Martha clutched her daughter's hand so tightly that her nails dug into Tammy's skin. Each bump in the road was like a jolt of terror, a reminder that time was slipping away. The paramedics' reassurances did little to quiet the growing dread that something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. As the vehicle's siren wailed into the night, Martha's desperate prayers mingled with the steady hum of the engine, a plea for a miracle that seemed ever more elusive with every heartbeat. The ambulance screeched to a halt outside the emergency bay of St. Vincent Hospital, its lights casting frantic shadows on the pavement. Inside, a team of nurses and doctors surged forward, their movements a blend of practiced calm and urgent precision. Tammy was quickly lifted onto a stretcher, and Martha was forced to step back as a nurse gently but firmly instructed her to wait in the corridor. The sterile, cold air of the emergency room contrasted sharply with the warmth of their home, and each beep of the monitors intensified the anxiety that gripped Martha's soul. Dr. Alan Miller, a seasoned physician known for his unflappable demeanor, swiftly took charge of the situation. His eyes scanned Tammy's condition with the precision of someone who had faced countless crises, yet even he couldn't hide the concern that creased his forehead. "She's tachycardic and her blood pressure is dropping," one of the nurses reported urgently. Dr. Miller nodded gravely, already piecing together the puzzle that her symptoms painted. "We need to run a full blood panel and get an abdominal ultrasound immediately," he instructed, his tone leaving no room for delay. As Martha paced the cold, linoleum-floored corridor, each tick of the clock was a painful reminder of the precious time slipping away. She clutched a worn photograph of Tammy, remembering happier times when her daughter's laughter filled their small apartment with light and hope. Now, in the sterile embrace of the hospital, that laughter was silenced by the relentless agony tearing through her child's body. Martha's thoughts swirled with questions that had no answers. What was happening to Tammy? How could a simple stomach ache evolve into something so catastrophic? And most of all, was there anything that could be done before it was too late? In those harrowing moments, every heartbeat felt like a desperate countdown, a race against time to save a life that was slipping further away with each passing second. The night, which had once held the promise of quiet reprieve, had transformed into a battleground where hope and despair waged a silent war. As the medical team prepared for urgent tests, Martha's trembling hands and tearful eyes bore silent witness to a mother's unyielding determination. She would not let her daughter slip away without a fight. In the sterile light of the hospital's diagnostic room, the tension was palpable. Dr. Alan Miller, still calmly assessing Tammy's fragile condition, ordered an abdominal ultrasound. The room filled with the soft hum of machines and the quiet murmurs of medical staff, each sound underscoring the gravity of the moment. Martha's heart pounded in her ears as she paced the waiting area, a silent prayer on her lips. Every minute stretched on interminably, each one laden with dread of what the test might reveal. When the ultrasound images appeared on the screen, Dr. Miller's eyes narrowed in disbelief. The images showed clear evidence that Tammy was not suffering from a simple stomach upset or food poisoning. Instead, the scan revealed that Tammy was approximately 5 months pregnant, a revelation that struck the room like a thunderbolt. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Martha's breath caught in her throat, and Tammy's eyes, clouded with pain and confusion, widened in horror. The unimaginable truth had surfaced, shattering the fragile veil of normalcy that had once cloaked their lives. Dr. Miller's calm voice returned, though it was laced with deep sorrow as he explained the situation. "The tests confirm that Tammy is 5 months pregnant," he said softly, glancing between Tammy and a now inconsolable Martha. The words hung in the air like a curse. Martha's heart shattered as the reality of the situation overwhelmed her. Her young daughter was pregnant. The very thought was inconceivable. How could something so profound and devastating have remained hidden for so long? Tammy's own reaction was a tumult of terror, disbelief, and sorrow. She stared blankly at the ceiling as if trying to dissociate from the reality unfolding before her. The doctor's explanation continued, cautiously outlining the complications that could arise from such a fragile pregnancy. At this age, and in your current condition, there are significant risks, including premature labor and other medical complications, Dr. Miller warned, his tone both clinical and deeply empathetic. Martha's eyes welled up with tears as she absorbed each word, her mind racing through a torrent of emotions, anger, guilt, heartbreak, and an overwhelming sense of powerlessness. In that sterile room, the lives of both mother and daughter were irreversibly altered. Tammy's voice, barely audible, broke through the heavy silence. "It can't be. I'm just a child," she whispered, the words a trembling confession of a secret that had haunted her for far too long. Martha's arms instinctively reached out to comfort her daughter, yet there was little she could do to mend the shattered pieces of innocence. In that moment, the hospital room became a crucible of despair, a place where the boundaries between hope and hopelessness blurred as the unthinkable truth settled in like a dark, unyielding shadow. Dr. Miller and the rest of the medical team shifted into action, preparing to address the complex medical challenges that lay ahead. As they began outlining the steps for further tests and careful monitoring, Martha clutched Tammy's hand with renewed determination. Even as her world crumbled around her, she vowed silently that she would protect her daughter at all costs. The truth was now out in the open, a truth that would force them both to confront a future filled with uncertainties and unimaginable challenges. In that quiet, heart-wrenching moment, Martha and Tammy stood on the precipice of a journey that would test the limits of their courage and reshape their lives forever. In the sterile confines of her hospital bed, Tammy's mind spun with disbelief and terror. The revelation of her pregnancy, delivered in hushed, clinical tones by Dr. Miller, felt like an intrusion into her very identity, a secret that had festered in the depths of her being now laid bare for all to see. The initial shock gave way to a desperate denial. "They're wrong," she whispered, her voice trembling as if each syllable carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears. "I can't be pregnant. I'm only 14. Her eyes darted around the room, seeking an escape from the horror that threatened to consume her. Martha, who had been a silent sentinel at Tammy's bedside, now stepped closer, her face etched with anguish and worry. "Tammy, please, tell me what happened. Who did this to you?" Martha's voice was a mixture of pleading and incredulity, each word laced with the hope that her daughter might find a way to articulate the unspeakable. But Tammy's gaze fell to the crumpled hospital blanket, her fingers twisting its edge as if trying to unravel the tangled threads of her pain. I don't know," she murmured, her voice barely more than a ghost of sound. Every question felt like an intrusion, a probe into memories too painful to revisit. In the days that followed, Tammy's silence became a barrier as impenetrable as the walls of the hospital room. The doctors explained the medical complications and the need for careful monitoring, but their words floated around her like distant echoes. Every time Martha asked gentle, insistent questions, Tammy would shut her eyes tightly and pull the blanket closer, as if the fabric could shield her from the truth. "It's all too much," Tammy would say softly, her eyes rimmed with tears. "I just can't talk about it right now." Detective Jennings soon entered the scene, a kind-eyed, patient man whose calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos of emotions swirling in the room. He approached Tammy with quiet empathy, assuring her that she was safe and that she could share her story when she was ready. "There's no rush," he told her gently, his voice imbued with the promise of understanding. Yet, every attempt to coax a confession was met with silence or a vague, halting denial. Tammy's inner torment was too raw. The truth was locked away behind walls of fear and shame. Martha's own heart ached with an unbearable mix of sorrow and frustration. The unspoken questions hung in the air, a silent litany of why and how that neither mother nor daughter could answer. As the days blurred into nights filled with anxious waiting, Martha tried to reassure herself that maybe, just maybe, Tammy would find the strength to speak when the time was right. But every unanswered question deepened the chasm between them, leaving both to wonder if the truth might remain forever hidden in the shadows of Tammy's terrified silence. In the quiet moments before sleep, as Tammy stared at the ceiling in a futile attempt to escape her memories, she wondered if admitting the truth would shatter what little hope remained in her fragile world. The unuttered confession loomed like a dark specter, haunting every thought. And though Martha's gentle prodding came from a place of love, Tammy felt an overwhelming need to retreat further into herself, to protect her inner pain from the prying eyes of a world that was suddenly too vast and too unforgiving. In that hospital room, where every beep of the monitor and every hushed conversation echoed the gravity of her fate, Tammy's silence became both a refuge and a prison. She longed to speak the truth, yet every time she tried, the words stuck like thorns in her throat. And so, the secret remained a heavy, unyielding weight on her soul, leaving both mother and daughter adrift in a sea of unanswered questions and unhealed wounds. Detective Jennings arrived at the hospital with quiet determination. His presence was calm, his demeanor measured as he took in the gravity of the situation. Over the course of several tense days, he became a familiar face at Tammy's bedside, always respectful of her space yet gently persistent in his pursuit of the truth. He started by simply sitting nearby, occasionally offering soft words of reassurance. "I understand you're scared," he said during one quiet afternoon, his tone devoid of judgment. "When you're ready, we're here to help." For Tammy, every visit by the detective was a reminder that she was being watched, not just medically, but also legally. The unspoken threat of an investigation loomed over her, each unanswered question adding another layer of complexity to her already tortured emotions. Yet, Jennings was patient. He recognized that Tammy's silence was not resistance, but a desperate defense against reliving trauma too painful to recount. Slowly, he began to build a rapport with her, leaving behind small tokens, a drawing he made on a notepad, a gentle note of encouragement that signaled he was on her side, not there to pry or judge. In hushed moments when Tammy managed to speak in broken, tentative sentences, Detective Jennings listened intently. He would ask questions in a low, gentle tone, careful not to overwhelm her. "It's okay if you can't remember everything right now," he'd say, his eyes kind and understanding. Even as Tammy remained reluctant, the detective made it clear that she had control over her own story. He explained that sometimes, sharing even a fragment of the truth could be a step toward healing, a way to reclaim the narrative of her life from the dark forces that had invaded it. Martha, who watched these interactions with a mixture of relief and anxiety, was grateful for Jennings's compassion. However, the detective's careful probing only heightened her concern as she recalled glimpses of her daughter's distant, haunted look when the conversation veered too close to the incident. Each time Tammy's eyes filled with tears and she clutched her blanket tighter, Martha felt her heart break anew. Yet, Jennings reassured her that every small step was progress, that the truth, once spoken, could begin to heal the deep wounds that had marred their lives. During one visit, as rain pattered against the hospital windows, Tammy finally handed Jennings a small cell phone. On its screen were cryptic messages and fragments of conversations, evidence that hinted at the identity of the person responsible for her plight. The detective handled the phone with utmost care, his face etched with a mixture of sympathy and grim determination. "Thank you, Tammy," he murmured, his voice soft but resolute. "This will help us understand what happened." In that moment, Tammy's eyes shone with a fragile glimmer of trust. Perhaps, she thought, it was time to let a part of the truth see the light, to allow her pain to become the first step toward justice. Yet, even as Detective Jennings made progress, Tammy's internal battle raged on. The memories that haunted her were not easily unburdened. Each recollection was wrapped in fear, shame, and a desperate need to forget. For nights on end, she lay awake, the silent weight of her secret pressing down on her, even as the detective's reassuring presence whispered promises of a better future. In that room, where every question remained unanswered, Tammy's guarded silence was both a shield and a prison, a barrier that only time and gentle persistence might someday dissolve. Through it all, Detective Jennings remained unwavering, a steady beacon in the tumultuous storm of Tammy's life. His quiet dedication and compassionate inquiries slowly chipped away at the hardened walls of her silence, promising that when she was ready, the truth would emerge, and with it, a path to healing and justice for a soul that had been too long in the dark. The investigation that Detective Jennings painstakingly pursued began to bear fruit. In the days following Tammy's tentative confession, new evidence emerged that pointed to a figure who had long lurked in the shadows of their small community. Lucas Harrison. Initially, Lucas had been seen as an unassuming man, blending into everyday life with a veneer of normality. However, as Jennings pieced together the cryptic messages from Tammy's phone and cross-referenced them with other evidence, a disturbing pattern emerged. Late one rainy afternoon, as the city's streets glistened under the pallid glow of streetlights, the police moved in on Lucas's modest home. The door was rapped on with an unyielding insistence, and Lucas answered with a flicker of confusion that quickly turned into panic. Inside his dim living room, cluttered with hastily packed belongings, Lucas's heart raced as he realized that his time was running out. When officers confronted him with the evidence, a combination of DNA results, message logs, and Tammy's own tearful silence, Lucas's facade of control began to crumble. The stark realization that he was being unmasked for his crimes sent him into a tailspin of panic and denial. At first, Lucas attempted to argue that the evidence was flawed, that the accusations were a misunderstanding. He stuttered through his defense, his eyes darting nervously around the room as if seeking an escape. But Detective Jennings's steady, unwavering gaze and the cold, hard facts presented by forensic experts left no room for ambiguity. "We have everything we need," Jennings stated firmly, his voice echoing with the authority of justice. "Your messages, the DNA tests, and Tammy's account, none of it can be dismissed." As the evidence was laid bare, the stark reality settled over Lucas like a heavy shroud. His confident demeanor crumbled, and the man who once thought himself invincible was reduced to a trembling shell of fear and regret. The formal arrest was swift and decisive. Officers led Lucas away in handcuffs, the sound of the clinking metal a grim punctuation to the end of a reign of terror. The news of his arrest rippled through the community, a mixture of relief for those who had long suspected something was amiss, and shock for those who had once viewed him as a benign neighbor. For Tammy, however, Lucas's capture was a moment of conflicted emotion. While a part of her longed for the retribution that justice promised, another part felt a numb emptiness. The arrest did not bring back her lost innocence or ease the searing pain of betrayal. It merely marked the beginning of a new chapter in her journey, a chapter where accountability and healing would slowly, painstakingly, be pursued. Back at the hospital, as Detective Jennings updated the medical staff and reassured a distraught Martha, the gravity of the situation began to sink in. The arrest of Lucas Harrison was not just a legal victory. It was a symbolic turning point, a moment when the long-hidden truth of Tammy's suffering was brought into the harsh light of justice. Yet, even as the authorities celebrated the breakthrough, the emotional scars remained. Tammy's eyes, now vacant and haunted, betrayed the deep-seated trauma that no sentence or legal process could ever fully mend. As Lucas was led away, his face a mix of bitter denial and resignation, the community braced itself for the fallout. Detective Jennings promised that the investigation would continue, that every stone would be turned until every detail of Tammy's ordeal was laid bare. And though Tammy herself was overwhelmed by a mixture of relief and deep sorrow, she clutched her mother's hand with a determination born of quiet resilience. In that moment, amidst the chaos of the arrest and the grim realities of the case, a fragile hope began to glimmer. Hope that justice might someday restore a measure of peace to her shattered life. In the days following Lucas Harrison's arrest, the hospital corridors and waiting rooms became quiet sanctuaries for reflection and sorrow. Though Lucas was now in custody, the emotional aftermath of the ordeal lingered like a persistent shadow over Tammy and her mother, Martha. The initial burst of relief that accompanied the news of his arrest was tempered by the cold realization that true healing would be a long, arduous process. Tammy, still reeling from the enormity of what had happened, lay in her hospital bed with vacant eyes and a body weakened by pain and stress. Doctors continued to monitor her closely, explaining that her condition was delicate given the early stage of her pregnancy and the intense stress her body had endured. "Your body has been through a tremendous ordeal," Dr. Miller said gently, his tone sympathetic as he reviewed her latest test results. "We need to take every precaution to ensure both you and your baby remain as healthy as possible." The gravity of his words struck Tammy hard. She was caught in a web of physical and emotional trauma, her body a battlefield scarred by violence and betrayal. Meanwhile, Martha stayed at her daughter's side day and night, her own heart burdened with guilt, regret, and an overwhelming desire to protect Tammy from further harm. As the medical staff continued their rounds, Martha found herself overwhelmed by a torrent of conflicting emotions. Every new piece of paperwork, every whispered conversation in the hallways, felt like a reminder of the deep wounds that could not be easily healed. The discussions about potential complications, premature labor, internal injuries, long-term health risks, were clinical and detached, but for Martha, they resonated with the personal tragedy that had befallen her only child. Each word, each statistic, was a dagger to a heart already shattered by the loss of innocence and the betrayal that had upended their lives. Despite the somber atmosphere, a sense of cautious hope began to emerge. With Lucas Harrison removed from the picture, there was now a tangible possibility of reclaiming some measure of safety and stability. Support groups for young victims and counseling sessions were arranged, and while Tammy's initial reaction was one of resistance and silence, slowly, the door to healing began to crack open. In small, hesitant steps, Tammy started to engage with counselors who specialized in trauma recovery. They encouraged her to speak, to write, to express her pain in ways that might help her understand and eventually overcome the darkness that had taken root inside her. Martha, too, sought solace and support from friends, community organizations, and legal advocates. Yet, in quiet moments alone, she found herself tormented by the nagging question, could she have done more to protect her daughter? The guilt was a constant, unwelcome companion, as relentless as the pain that had once racked Tammy's fragile body. Together, they began to navigate the labyrinth of grief, each day marked by both setbacks and small victories, a kind word from a stranger, a reassuring smile from a counselor, a brief moment when Tammy's eyes held a glimmer of hope instead of despair. Even as the legal process moved forward, with the community watching and murmuring in equal parts of condemnation and sympathy, Tammy's personal journey became the quiet battle of a young girl determined to reclaim her life. In her silent moments, as she stared at the hospital ceiling or clutched a worn teddy bear, Tammy resolved that her future would not be defined solely by the horrors of her past. There was a quiet determination in her that, despite the overwhelming odds, refused to be completely broken. And so, in the aftermath of Lucas's arrest, while the scars remained visible and the pain was far from gone, a fragile new hope began to take root. Tammy and Martha, bound together by their shared suffering, started to imagine a future where justice might someday bring healing, and where every step forward, no matter how tentative, could lead them away from the darkness that had once threatened to engulf them completely. The day of the trial arrived with a heavy, oppressive air, as if the very sky bore witness to the cruelty of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Tammy, still a shadow of the vibrant girl she once was escorted into the courtroom. The stark, sterile environment was a far cry from the familiar hospital corridors, yet it felt inevitable, a stage on which her painful truth was to be laid bare for all to see. Every step she took toward the witness stand felt like wading through an endless void of fear and sorrow, each movement a silent rebellion against the darkness that had defined her existence for so long. The courtroom was filled with murmurs and shifting eyes, a collective audience to a story that was both deeply personal and disturbingly public. Lucas Harrison sat at the defendant's table, his face an unreadable mask of calm that barely concealed the storm of guilt and defiance underneath. His lawyer, smooth and methodical, peppered the proceedings with questions intended to undermine Tammy's account. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" he asked with a tone that dripped with insinuation. "If your story is so compelling, why did you remain silent?" Every question felt like a knife to Tammy's heart. Though her voice trembled, she gathered the strength to speak, her words rising in a fragile cadence that belied the turmoil inside her. She recounted the painful moments, those long, agonizing days in the hospital, the relentless fear that had haunted her nights, the quiet suffering that had pushed her to the brink of despair. With every word, Tammy was forced to relive memories too harrowing to fully embrace, yet each confession was a step toward reclaiming her voice from the clutches of terror. Martha sat in the courtroom, her eyes brimming with tears as she watched her daughter confront the monster who had upended their lives. Her heart pounded with a mixture of pride and sorrow as Tammy's testimony unfolded, a testimony that was raw, unfiltered, and painfully honest. The defense's strategy was clear: cast doubt on Tammy's memory, question the consistency of her recollections, and insinuate that her silence was a symptom of something far less sinister than it truly was. Yet, as Tammy spoke, her voice grew steadier, her eyes locking onto Lucas's with a fierce determination that belied her tender age. When Tammy finally paused, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. It was a moment suspended in time, a silent acknowledgement that the truth had been spoken, that the monster who had once hidden in plain sight was now exposed for all to see. Lucas's lawyer attempted to sow seeds of uncertainty, pointing out minor inconsistencies, but his words rang hollow against the overwhelming evidence of Tammy's sincerity and the corroborating evidence meticulously gathered by Detective Jennings. The judge's voice, measured and resolute, eventually cut through the tension as he delivered the sentence, 30 years with no possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in a tumult of whispers and shocked gasps. For Tammy, the verdict was not a moment of triumph in the conventional sense. It was a bittersweet closure to a chapter marred by terror and betrayal. In that solemn moment, as Lucas was led away in handcuffs, Tammy felt a surge of emotions, a quiet vindication mixed with the profound sorrow of all that had been lost. She looked directly at Lucas one final time, her gaze unflinching, conveying that she was no longer the frightened child he had once manipulated. In that silent exchange, there was an unspoken promise that her life would no longer be defined by the darkness he had inflicted. After the trial, as the courtroom slowly emptied, Detective Jennings offered a few reassuring words to Martha and Tammy. "You've taken the first step toward healing," he said gently. "I know this is not the end, but it is a beginning." And though the journey ahead was uncertain and fraught with emotional obstacles, Tammy's resolve had been strengthened. The trial had forced her to confront the monster that had haunted her, and in doing so, she reclaimed a small piece of the life that had been stolen from her. Standing there, with the weight of the past finally lifted from her shoulders, Tammy felt that maybe, just maybe, a future without fear was possible. In the aftermath of the trial, the heavy burden of grief and trauma slowly began to yield a tentative hope. The courtroom verdict, though bittersweet, signified more than just punishment for Lucas Harrison. It marked the start of a long, arduous journey toward healing for Tammy and Martha. In the weeks that followed, as the legal proceedings receded into memory, the focus shifted toward rebuilding a life that had been shattered by unspeakable pain. The once ominous silence that filled Tammy's world was now punctuated by small moments of gentle reassurance, the soft encouragement of counselors, the warm embrace of supportive friends, and the steady, unwavering presence of her mother. Martha took on the role of both protector and guide, determined to forge a new path away from the painful memories of the past. She began making plans for a fresh start, a move to a new city, a small apartment far from the whispers and pitying looks of those who had once known them. As they prepared to leave the remnants of their old life behind, Martha carefully packed away not only their belongings but also the painful memories that had threatened to define them. In a quiet moment of introspection, she held a faded photograph of Tammy as a little girl, her eyes bright with innocent joy, and vowed that no matter what lay ahead, she would do everything in her power to nurture her daughter's spirit back to health. For Tammy, healing was not a linear process. Some nights, the nightmares would still creep in, dark, suffocating visions that pulled her back to the depths of her terror. But gradually, with the help of a compassionate therapist and the steady support of her mother, she learned to confront her fears. Late one evening, in the soft glow of a new apartment's living room, Tammy finally picked up a pen and began writing in a brand new journal. The pages, crisp and untouched, soon filled with words that chronicled not just the horror of her past but also the emerging strength within her. With each sentence, she reclaimed a fragment of her identity, her handwriting a testament to resilience and the promise of a future built on courage rather than despair. As time passed, the scars of trauma began to fade into the background, replaced by small, affirming moments of joy, a shared laugh over dinner, a quiet walk in a sunlit park, the discovery of new hobbies that rekindled a sense of wonder. Detective Jennings would occasionally check in, offering updates and gentle reminders that justice had been served, yet always encouraging Tammy to focus on her own recovery. His visits were a reminder that while the past could never be completely erased, it did not have to define her future. Standing at the threshold of their new beginning, Tammy and Martha embraced the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The memories, though still present in quiet moments, were slowly being replaced by the promise of renewal. With the knowledge that Lucas Harrison would never again threaten their peace, Tammy allowed herself to envision a life where hope could flourish even in the wake of heartbreak. Together, they stepped into a world that was, for the first time in a long while, filled with the possibility of healing, a journey where every day offered a chance to rebuild, to learn, and to live beyond the shadows of the past. And so, as the sun set on that final day of an old chapter and rose on the promise of a new dawn, Tammy whispered a quiet vow to herself, to keep writing, to keep healing, and to reclaim every stolen piece of her soul. In the soft cadence of a new beginning, justice and healing slowly intertwined, offering a future where the light could once again break through the darkness. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. See you in the next story.